Previously on Moneypenny. We wrapped up the remaining mandatory items for our vessel safety check with Coast Guard Auxiliary Bob Allen, and then he gave us our stripes. Stay tuned as Bob takes us through some of the discussion items on the vessel safety check. These aren't mandatory but useful to know. And then we sit down for a little chat with Bob to get to know a bit more about him.
Now this is the time that the boat operators can get a little defensive because I'll ask questions. But just to calm you, Justin, these are recommended and discussion items.
Okay.
So if there's items on here that we're not covered with, it's okay.
Okay.
But if we could make the boat as safe as it could be, as a volunteer for the Coast Guard Auxiliary, we would share these kind of ideas.
Great.
The first one, which you asked just a moment ago about, is the marine radio.
Yep.
Does the vessel have a marine radio?
VHF. And also a handheld submersible unit, which when we're sailing clips to PFD. So if we have to abandon the vessel, we can take a submersible with us. We can be in touch in the unlikely event we have to be rescued. This also has an MMSI registration, so it's got the one-touch distress call, as does this.
Excellent. Now, have you? I guess we should talk about Rescue 21 right now. Have you taken the time to register the MMSI number through the Coast Guard?
Yeah, that is registered. Yeah.
Good. Many operators of vessels, when they purchase the radios that have the advanced system, which is a one-touch system, are not aware that they are now required to make the second step, which is once you get the form, you have to register the vessel so that the information as it gets sent through your system will be identified by the Coast Guard system. So that's a good thing for some of your viewers to think about.
Great.
So another issue with the marine radio that I share is, as you're operating your vessel, if you have a marine radio on board, it must be turned on. So if you didn't have a marine radio, you couldn't turn it on. But since you do have a marine radio and it's operational, federal law says it has to be turned on. Now, do you know what the emergency channels are?
9 and 16.
Exactly. Well done. Many people don't know about 9 because we rarely talk about it anymore. 20, 30 years ago, 9 was talked about quite a bit. Next, recommended or discussion items. A bucket or dewatering device and a backup. Now, you have a bilge pump?
I have a bilge pump. I have a hand-operated bilge pump, and I have 2 buckets.
So you're well taken care of there. Even a bucket counts as a backup emergency dewatering device.
Great.
Mounted fire extinguishers. You see this fire extinguisher is mounted, and so that's recommended by the Coast Guard for 2 reasons. If you have a fire extinguisher that's fairly heavy rolling around, it might injure one of your passengers, or it might be damaged. So they recommend having it, and it's not even required. It's just recommended. Anchor in the line. I've seen both your anchors. You have 2 anchors. Remember, you always anchor a vessel from the bow. And you also have a chain, and that also reduces the chance of fouling the anchor and allows it to hold into the bottom of the seat bit better. First aid kit. All right, here's a first aid kit, and if you don't mind, I see you got yours on the wall. That's excellent. I want to make sure it's not a container of Jack Daniels. Good. Now, one of the things I always emphasize when looking at first aid kits, and you have an outstanding one here, is gauze pads. And yours has probably enough to conduct minor surgery, so it's a very thorough first aid kit.
We're pretty good. So yeah, there's gauze bandages. We've got band-aids, burn creams, triangular bandages, splices. The tape we need, some other creams and what have you. So
excellent. Yeah, and if you had someone, and maybe you've had a first aid class already, but if you had someone that has had an injury, applying pressure to if it's a cut, I guess I'm talking about, using the gauze pad to prevent the chance of infection, applying pressure, and then obviously getting to shore as quickly as possible.
Great.
A person in the water kit. You have a throwable in case you have a...
We have the life sling on the back. So we've got the life sling mounted to the transom right there. Just video that while we're talking about it. That's mounted to the transom, and we can use that as a throwable. There's a line that comes off the device into the bag and ties it onto the boat. And then there is also there is also the ability to use that as a recovery system for man overboard as well.
Excellent. Now I notice it's on the stern. If you had someone who is in the water who might be surprised they fell in the water, which most people are, a lot of times it's easier to bring them around to the stern to get them back on board versus trying to haul them up over the bow, which has more freeboard. If you are getting ready to go out and you have inexperienced mariners with your group, part of the pre-departure briefing for your passengers would be, what do you do if somebody falls overboard?
Yep.
So what do you tell them?
Well, so we tell them whoever sees them, yells and hollers, man overboard, and if you see them, that is the person who maintains visual contact as much as possible with the person in the water. Mm-hmm. And we want them holding on, we want them pointing. And then the crew, the captain can then follow the point. We can douse the sails if we have to, return to the position that's being pointed. While we're doing all of this, the person that saw them keeps their eye on where they went in, keeps their eye on them as much as possible, and points. And if we're lucky enough to have more crew on board, somebody else can then also be deploying the throwable to the person who went overboard.
Excellent. The 3 key items there: have someone let everybody else know somebody fell, have the person keep visual contact with them because it's very difficult to see them in the water, and have somebody throw something to them. So, and the arm pointing in that direction will help everyone guide. One other thought I would throw in there, which is approaching them from a downwind position, so that you don't accidentally have the vessel, injure them as you try to rescue them. Good, excellent. Inland visual distress signals. I started to talk a little bit about our orange flag here. Some of the orange flags have a dot and a square, and that's also the distress. Let's see if this one has it, if you don't mind me.
Yeah, no.
The orange flag itself is a visual distress signal, but you'll see some of them that have the black and the damage. Some of the orange flags will have a circle or a black dot and a black square. The orange itself is satisfactory, but some of them may seem good. Yeah, this is okay. Now we
Fold it back, and that'll be
I'll fold it up. You talk.
Capacity plate. Now, does the vessel have a capacity plate or certificate of compliance on board?
For persons, for people?
Right, number of folks on board.
It does not.
It'll be listed. Okay. The handbook will probably give you an idea. Remember, this is a recommended item, not a mandatory item, but after 70, most of the vessels did tell you how many people have on board. A lot of time that will be a weight and a number, such as 8 people or 2,400 pounds, let's say.
Okay.
Maybe less than that, I guess 2,000 pounds. So if you had 5, if you had 10 very trim people, just because you're below the weight limit doesn't mean you're legal. It's the lower number always.
Okay.
I guess it's sort of common sense. But one issue that the Coast Guard will immediately order a vessel return to shore or return to the dock on is overcapacity. And for recreational mariners, this is some of the people that don't boat very often who bought a boat, have very little experience or knowledge, haven't studied it very much. That's something that's a big concern, because when you have a large crew on board, even if you have an experienced captain, you have a lot of passengers on board and there's some distraction going on board and the passenger were to fall off, if there's many other people on board, the captain may not recognize that there's a distress situation.
Sure.
Good. And now we're going to talk about discussion items. So this gets into a lot of helpful items, which is accident reporting. Now the federal requirement is if you had someone who was injured over immediate first aid, if it was something where you'd have to take them to the hospital, they were seriously injured, obviously you'd contact the authorities immediately to request assistance. But if there was a serious injury, you have 48 hours to notify the Coast Guard. You got the list there?
We have the cruising log, and we would log it in the cruising log, time, date, other information, and then we would contact the Coast Guard once we've delivered them to emergency assistance.
Right. Now, there are other scenarios where a notification to the Coast Guard or the local authorities has to take place, which is the vessel sinks, because now it could be a potential hazard of navigation. Someone, immediate first aid, over $2,000 worth of damage. There's a collision. You hit a dock or 2 vessels hit. If there's over $2,000 worth of damage, and these days that happens real quick, there has to be notification made to the Coast Guard within 10 days. Someone dies or someone disappears off the vessel. even if you didn't like them, you still have to report it. So those are some of the accident reporting things, and a very comprehensive list can be found in the federal regulations, which I gave you there.
Great.
Offshore operations. If you're going to operate your vessel out in Lake Michigan, make sure someone knows where you're going and when you're coming back. If you're going to go up by the Canadian waters, there would be a scenario where you would have to get an FCC license for your boat. And you can go online and Google FCC license, and it's not impossible to get an FCC license. Mostly it's about registering. But if you go up to the Soo Locks, somewhere up by Canada, you would need to get an FCC license. Most of the time you don't need an FCC license. Navigation, charts, and aids. Now, you probably have a GPS on the boat. Seems like everybody does these days.
I'm old school.
Even better.
We do have a handheld GPS, but we always keep paper charts on the boat as well. I'm a big believer that wherever you go, you should have paper charts as well as a GPS or chart plotter. So we've got the which one is this called? This is the full Lake Michigan chart. So we have Lake Michigan. I mean, this is basically where we sail. We don't really go at this point. We don't go out of the lake, and if we change that, we'll obviously get the charts. And then we have on the back the Southern Lake, and this is our main cruising grounds.
Good. Survival tips. I always share with boaters, tell your passengers when you're part of your departure briefing, if something happens to Justin and I'm not able to answer, I decide to jump on somebody else's boat and leave, or I get knocked off overboard, always stay with the boat. We had a terrible accident that happened in Chicago 12 years ago now, where it was a father got knocked off his boat. He had his two young daughters, and they had to decide, was it safer to stay on the boat, on Dad's sailboat, or go be by Dad? And they jumped off the water, and of course they all perished. So it's a kind of a gloomy thing to do, but you tell your passengers, something happens to Justin, stay with the boat, because it's a lot easier. Number one, let's say with the boat we're having trouble with navigation, the boat is a lot easier to rescue than a single person in the water. It'd be a lot easier to find them. First aid, we talked briefly about maybe taking a Red Cross first aid kit or a first aid class to learn more about dealing with any accidents, but I think you have that very well covered. Fueling and fueling management. Obviously, you want to be careful when you're fueling the vessel to make sure there's no spills. Some people have rags that they keep nearby. If it was a vessel that was to take other kinds of fuel, like some of your viewers may have, you would want to have the pump nozzle and constant nozzle to input to the tank contact, because you don't want any static discharge to occur, which could cause a fire. And so fueling management, rule of thirds. If you don't have sail power, if you have a destination you're going to, if you get there and you've used more than a third of your fuel, you may not have enough fuel to get back, especially if the winds and tide change or what have you. So rule of the thirds, a third to get there, a third to get back, and keep a third in reserve, just if you have a vessel that doesn't have sails, of course. Float plan. What is a float plan? Well, there are very extensive float plans which involve the color of the boat and different information about the boat. But basically, the Coast Guard wants us to share with these vessel exams. Let someone know where you're going, when you're coming back, how many people are with you, and I often tell boaters that have trailerable boats, tell them where you parked your car. Because if they go down there and the trailer's gone, they figured, the sailor forgot to call me, told me they got back. But if they go down there and the trailer's still there, the mariner, if it's hours later, may be in distress. So a float plan, if you go online, if you Google float plan for the Coast Guard Auxiliary website, you'll have a highly detailed float plan which involves each stop plan for the day, emergency contact information that you can fill out. And for sailors especially, solo sailors, it's really helpful.
Very good.
Weather and sea conditions. Of course, in the morning, a lot of time the winds will be light, and in the afternoon, the wind will start to pick up. So you have to be aware of that. Best to check weather right before you go out. Most mariners have Channel 4 weather radio on their vessel so that they can hear.
And that wraps up all of the mandatory and discussion items on the vessel safety check. Bob was kind enough to give us a couple of minutes of his time so we could learn a little bit more about him.
So we were here with Bob Allen from the US Coast Guard Auxiliary. He's just done a safety check on my vessel. Bob, tell me about the auxiliary. You're all volunteers?
It's a volunteer organization. There's no pay involved. You can put a lot of time and energy into it, but you get the satisfaction of helping people. And some people spend an incredible amount of time volunteering, and the presumption is, oh, well, they must be getting rich doing this. No, they're enjoying the satisfaction. I've had a chance to do a lot of boating. I teach the classes to young people. The great hope is that by sharing the safety knowledge I have, I'm going to keep someone from having a bad day and make them enjoy their water time more.
So now you do these safety inspections free of charge,
right.
And if there's something wrong, you're not writing tickets, you're not persecuting anybody, you're helping us avoid tickets in the future, and you also teach classes, is that right?
Right. If you go online and to the Coast Guard Auxiliary website, cgox.org, Charlie Golf Alpha Uniform X-ray.org, you can find local classes being offered in this area. Obviously, they're mostly concentrated on the lake shore. There's some inland locations where you can take a class, but we do ask for money for those classes, even though we're all volunteers, because it helps us buy books, slide projectors, computers, material to help teach the classes. But the organization started in 1939. About during the time of World War II. My dad served over in England, your country, in 1943 to 1945, and there was a sense when they came back that they were going to make the United States a better place to live and have a great society. So now, of course, we have the online and the video games, and the young people may not feel that sense of the great society, but as volunteers, we can help each other, and that's the joy you get from being in the auxiliary. And generally, the more you give, the more satisfaction you get. So,
how long have you been doing it now?
Since 2003. What is that? 13 years
13
now.
Years, yeah. And do you go out on? I mean, we see the Coast Guard patrol boats. Do you go out on those as well as volunteers, or is your job more shore-based?
Well, we actually have vessels, and many times people don't realize that a vessel with Coast Guard auxiliary flags on it is not part of the Coast Guard. In many senses, we are, but we're able to do boat patrols and air patrols. My group is also involved with flying up and down Lake Michigan looking for vessels in distress and keeping an eye on lakes and rivers. If we see pollution in progress, there was an oil spill kind of on the southern end of Lake Michigan near Gary not that long ago, where a Coast Guard auxiliary vessel was airborne and made a report and advised the Coast Guard there was a situation, and the Coast Guard went out there to protect the water by putting up the derricks or whatever to reduce the amount of, or the equipment to reduce the amount of pollution.
Fantastic. So you're not involved with policing drugs or policing boats or anything. You're really involved in safety, in assisting people in distress, and obviously the monitoring of the pollution on the waterways.
Right, and we don't carry guns. We're not allowed to carry guns, so we can't be part of the military. But in an emergency situation, members of the auxiliary are sometimes asked to come support the Coast Guard, monitoring radios and that type of thing. So you will see Coast Guard auxiliary members at the Coast Guard stations, and so there's an expectation that the members will conduct themselves in a reasonable way. Not everyone can get in the Coast Guard auxiliary. You cannot have a criminal record, and so anyone with a felony shouldn't bother trying to join the Coast Guard auxiliary, because we take the best.
Up all of the mandatory and discussion items on the vessel safety check, and again, remember, this was tailored to my vessel. This is tailored to a 25-foot sailboat. The Coast Guard have this handy dandy little app here which you can download for free. It's a wonderful thing. It's got all of the state boating information that you need, state by state. You can also request a safety check, and you can check the safety requirements for your vessel based on the vessel length and whether you're sail or power. A couple of other things that you can do here. You can file your float plan. It's got information from the NOAA buoys for weather information. You can also report pollution, report any hazards, and just help to keep our waterways safe and clean and clear. So if you don't already have that, I highly recommend it. They do also have a rules of the road section, which is very, very useful. Highly recommend reading that. I want to thank Bob Allen and the Coast Guard Auxiliary for coming out and spending some time with us on Moneypenny this morning. I think it was incredibly valuable. I learned some stuff that I didn't know. It's very nice to know that we're in complete compliance with all of the safety regulations for our area and our type of boat. So if we do run into any trouble, it shouldn't be too bad, which is definitely nice to know. I highly recommend you get yourselves a vessel safety check if you haven't already. The Coast Guard Auxiliary are wonderful folks. They're there to keep us safe and to make sure that people are enjoying the water in a really safe way. So now, with our very, very safe vessel, it's time to go sailing.
Up next on Moneypenny, the weather's finally taking a turn for the better, and we get out to enjoy a nice sunset.